We got to get my team. Oh, here we go.
This is really just building anticipation for people, I think.
Hopefully to our selective audience. This is like the Stonehenge props dropping.
I do have a short thread to come that integrates Spinal Tap and SRNT Europe conference. So
we are now live. Welcome, friends. It's Jim McCarthy with American Vapor Manufacturers here with a special enhanced edition of Shaping Vaping, a podcast in which we talk about the latest news in tobacco and harm reduction and nicotine policy. Joined as ever by our special guest host, Joe Gitchell of Opinion Associates. Joe, how are you today?
Doing well, Jim. Thank you. Delighted to try this new approach and to make as many new mistakes as possible.
I'm confident we'll make a few today. You'll be pleased to see, just kicking off, I'm wearing my Shinnecock Hills golf shirt.
Very classy.
Merch shop there last week. Again, so much to get to. Really groundbreaking remarks, I've got to say, came from both the head of FDA, Marty Makary, and also from the Secretary of HHS, Robert Kennedy. So I'd like to kick off by talking about that, and then we'll move into the contretemps over the Washington Post and Dr. Lena Wen's two columns on vaping and pouches, and the correction that the Washington Post was forced to publish. And then we'll talk a little bit about some studies that have come out in the last couple days, along with a terrific article in Filter that just posted minutes ago, quoting your esteemed colleague Ariel Celia. So first off, as people will close vape news followers will know, in just the last few days, there have been really striking remarks from both the head of FDA and the head of HHS about vape policy, and yet they, to my mind anyway, are really strikingly contradictory. Maybe I'm not seeing it in the fullest of lights. I don't know. Hopefully you can give me some insight, Joe. But what I, paraphrasing, heard Dr. Makary say is he's been going on national television, Good Morning America. I saw him on another national network. He's been on a media tour, did some other public announcements on Twitter, social media, in effect saying, from where he sits, there's vape shops on every corner, is one line he keeps using. Number two, that he's going to do a nationwide crackdown backed up by what he keeps pointing out as 300 FDA agents with guns, is the phrase he uses. And then other bizarre comments, like he said that he's what's he calling it, a child vaping epidemic. So not even youth, they're calling it a child vaping epidemic, which of course is completely and demonstrably at odds with FDA and CDC's own figures on underage vaping. And then in addition, I couldn't even believe it when I read this. He said on Twitter, he said in an interview with Politico's Dasha Burns, that no one has been paying attention to vaping issues, and that by inference, he alone has figured out what to do about this. And what really struck me, and when we start there, Joe, what struck me about that is two things. Number one is that until he was confirmed as head of FDA, this gentleman had never once mentioned vaping or nicotine policy in his entire career.
That's not true, actually. He has a fully published paper from when I think he did his master's in public health at Harvard. And I believe it was focused on disinvestment from tobacco companies, urging that for higher ed institutions and things like that. And two, I think there is a brief clip of him during kind of Peaky Valley window in the fall of 2019, where he was asked, it wasn't the focus, I don't believe, of the interview, but he was asked about it, and he made some kind of general vaping is bad comment. So, but you're compared to others, it's not been a key focus of his work. It does make me want to wish for as many people as possible to watch You Don't Know Nicotine and maybe then watch it again. And it's pretty fascinating to imagine how the discourse around this topic could improve were more of the people expected to make important decisions were to ground themselves less in what they know that everybody around them knows and more in what do actual experts know. So I was going to work that in one way or another.
Okay.
And You Don't Know Nicotine, available on Apple TV and Amazon Prime.
Yes, no doubt. I wish he would watch that too, and I highly commend it. My complaint is in his insistence that no one else is aware of the issue but him. I mean, it's one thing to come out and say I've got all the answers. It's a step even further to say, guess what, American public, no one's been paying attention to this, but I'm on the ball. You see the difference?
I am aware of the difference, and if I had all of the same pages of the DSM that you occupy, I might fixate on that more. That seems, and I did meet the man and spoke with him for like 40 seconds. So that's the extent of my actual interaction with him at the Reagan-Udall Foundation annual public board meeting.
There's a good example. Like Reagan-Udall did a whole report on this topic low 2 years ago.
3 years ago.
Were they not paying attention? I mean, like what an asinine remark.
My sense, and from reading his Blind Spots book, is my sense is that he approaches these sorts of issues in a lens of where is the conventional wisdom not, fully integrating all the information. So I think I would look at that more as a style than a actual declaration of fact.
I'm reminded of the great comedian Bill Burr's routine when he talks about, how that would be like me writing a book on pregnancy, the third trimester and what to expect by Jim McCarthy. Ladies, you're going to start feeling a pressure. I mean, the absolute, and I hasten to add here too, he's well aware, and his ironically titled book Blind Spots, focuses on. The FDA has a huge perception problem with being regarded as arrogant, know-it-all, insufferable, insensitive to what ordinary people are going through. And so for him to come out and say something like that, no one's paying attention to this, and I've got the solution, people, listen up. It just confirms everyone's worst assumptions about the leadership of that agency. And maybe it's just me as a PR guy, but I just thought that was like so off key. But let's talk about the substance for a second. He also insisted that, there's vape shops on every corner. And again, there's a conflation here. I sense let me try to be generous. There's a conflation between smoke shops and sort of, pop-up bodegas like you might see in my hometown of New York City, convenience stores also to an extent, and vape shops, which are specialized retailers like AVM members that specialize in selling nicotine vaping products. And he is either ignorantly or intentionally conflating those and insisting that there's this huge proliferation of such shops when in reality, specialized vape shops have been in fact, wiped out nationwide, bankruptcies in every county in every state of this fair nation. And again, I just cannot get my head around the messaging there. I mean, is that ignorant? Is it manipulative? Like what? Help me understand why he would say something so obviously misguided.
So in the spirit of disclosures, I am less current on a lot of things than I would like to be. And that's for good reasons, because lots of stuff going on. And I'm just slower than I used to be. But my sense is that where I thought you were going to go with conflation was more the complexity introduced by the news related to kratom and 7-hydroxy as part of it, which then got kind of folded in. And
So
we've
bad.
seen this. So, but a way to think of this, we as a nation don't process, discuss, problem solve around the concept of addiction very well at all. And that is a big problem for us as society, whether it's opioids, alcohol,
Yeah.
smoking, gaming. I mean, there's all these problematic behaviors. Some of them have a biological component, some of them don't. But it really, we struggle. And, you know, my quip is, well, the Puritans came here. And I think there is a much stickier, thicker overlay of morality in the discussion of a lot of these topics than there might be in some other cultures. But that being said, I can totally see how a policymaker with a limited amount of the public's attention, it does feel efficient to talk about addiction and epidemics and threats and bundle them together. And I'm not trying to excuse it or say that it's exactly right or even that it's necessarily helpful. I don't think it's some purposeful, how do I really confuse enough people about the role of vape shops?
Well, he's not trying to confuse them.
I mean, and maybe
my sense is he's trying to justify this heavy-handed armed enforcement. And he's pointing out, mistakenly, that there's a proliferation of vape shops and that vape shops, according to him, are selling opioid-adjacent products. Ergo, I'm going to go in, kick the doors down, pew, 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 and put a stop to it. That's the point.
Yeah, I don't. You've left me without words to further.
Well, let me give you an opportunity. Let's imagine if I had my magic wand and Joe Gitchell was head of the FDA with one proviso. You had 15 seconds to say one thing on Good Morning America to Americans about nicotine policy. I mean, I can think up something. Doesn't seem that hard to me. And you know what else? I think the public would love to hear. Guess what? Great news, people. We're on the verge of solving one of the single biggest public health catastrophes in our nation's history, because the single most effective means of quitting cigarettes, we're now going to fast track approval. And I would urge you to, if you're a smoker, to switch. Period. Is that so crazy? Is that not newsworthy? Is that not sexy enough?
Well, so no, actually, I like that, and I can't resist noting, even though I believe the person who started it has managed to lose the password, so it's no longer active. But there is a Gitchell for FDA Twitter handle.
There is
out there. Yeah, no. You're not the first person to have that cunning idea. And lo, I shudder to think of where we would be as a society if that became more than satire and parody.
You would catch slings and arrows from AVM Twitter, Joe. We'd have the balustrades going all day long.
But and it does give me. I've mentioned you don't know nicotine. This is affording me yet another opportunity to encourage people to get into the Why Should I Trust You podcast, which just launched another episode this morning, which is amazeballs. You will love it, Jim. They have 2 Wall Street Journal reporters who broke the did we really have UFOs, or who was actually in on the cover-up and the cover-up for the cover-ups. It's fascinating and weaves it into the challenge in our modern information environment where there is so much mistrust for establishment and legacy institutions, and what to do about it. So I think there is a really a central point here about there is this hunger for understanding and insight, and there is not the commensurate degree of trust in expert voices to then accept that. And the problem is, how do we get to a better place? And it sure would, where I sit, is it sure would be nice were the institutional capacities to adopt more trust earning behaviors, and we have a long way to go on that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this. A good pivot, perhaps, to what Dr. McCary's boss, HHS Secretary RFK, said this week. Let me just read a little bit of that. This was an interview he did with a Brazilian news outlet, and he says, quote, "We are fast-tracking approval of vapes that don't have screens, bright colors, and candy flavor." He says that's because, quote, "smoking has gone down. Vapes are okay. They don't burn tobacco. So it is infinitely preferential to smoking." Quote, "Nicotine pouches are probably the safest way to consume nicotine, and vapes are second. But the thing we really want to get away from is cigarettes." Close quote. Now, there's a 15-second quote that I flabbergasted to hear him say that. How did you react?
I reacted as well that it's maybe the secretary has watched You Don't Know Nicotine, and that is an encouraging set of inputs. The struggle is that at least among my tribe of left-leaning public health folks, the fact that RFK Jr. is communicating those messages will make it harder to have them be accepted. It's just providing another excuse to resist that sort of information. Now, I'm still glad that he's on record as making those points, which do align very tightly with the available evidence, as best as I understand it. But back to this point about trust and our polarized society, how to get more people to build consensus is too much to hope for, but more of a weight of agreement around those points, because that's what we need to see, the kind of progress in regulation and policy that will drive down smoking and meet consumer
demands. Endorse all of it. I think his notions about he repeated some of the things about video games on the phones, and some of the tendentious claims that are straight out of the TFK talking points. And I would like to point out, in order to destigmatize tobacco harm reduction, Joe, that I myself am currently vaping caramel tobacco flavor, which I got from Allison. And so adults like flavors, I hasten to add that. But let me touch on a point you've made in previous shows, because I think maybe this is a breakthrough moment, a big Gordian knot that you pointed out before, that perhaps can be cut in half now. You've said in the past, paraphrasing, that FDA can't always steer toward the path that we would like because they're under pressures from different constituencies and have, political considerations that they have to navigate. Well, that may have been true when we first talked about it a year ago, when Senator Durbin's breathing down the neck of the FDA commissioner about his budget. But guess what? The head of HHS, that's the cabinet level secretary above FDA, just said, we're going to fast track vaping. You know why? Because it's vastly safer than cigarettes, and we want to help adults quit smoking cigarettes. Well, doesn't that cut the Gordian knot? Can't the FDA commissioner now say, well, there's the North Star that I'm steering toward. There may be other people who disagree, but that's the policy that I've been tasked with implementing. Does that not cut through the concerns you've raised before?
In the immediate term, it is very helpful set of direction and course. It does let me also tout the cool work by Corey Clark and colleagues that highlight that the public finds the decisions of institutions that they judge to have been politicized to be less trustworthy, even if they agree with those positions.
Yeah.
And my concern about that sort of statement being associated with someone who is unambiguously the political leadership of a department, that runs the risk of making that become this just enhances the factional sectarianism drama.
Well, I mean,
instead of
okay, but in that rubric, you can't win for losing then, according to that theory.
This is still a better problem, and that's why my quest to get more of the folks who see the world through my left-leaning lenses to say and ask questions about, do I really know nicotine? Have I watched this film? Why wouldn't I do that? And have I read the OHID report in 2022? Have I read the Health Canada funded vector output in 2024? What have I done to pressure test my beliefs in this arena? And is it consistent with someone who is trying to engage in good faith in a scientific policy regulatory arena with huge impacts on health? And that's where I actually think there are many of those people, if prompted and permitted to do that, will say, oh my gosh, it is true. If people don't light tobacco on fire and inhale the hot smoke into their lungs, but consume nicotine through pouches, through vaping, through the medicinal products, that is going to be a lot less harmful for them. How do we take advantage of that truth to reduce the harms from the use of this drug? And that's the opportunity to try to advance.
Well, I guess the good news for you, Joe, is that you'll recall our bet from last week that on whether FDA would approve authorize new vaping products, and you said yes by January 1, and I expect no. And so this would be a good test of that, because what Secretary of HHS is saying is sharply at odds with what the Commissioner of FDA is saying.
Well, I would say I wouldn't say the commissioner. I wouldn't say it's necessarily at odds.
Well, perhaps not those quotes, but forgive me for interjecting. But notice the actions too. And they've been sending out warning letters and other MDOs and other kinds of, enforcement heavy communiques. They've been sending agents. They've been working with FBI, DOJ, Customs and Border Patrol. I mean, they're doing everything again, and there's been not a word, not one syllable from the Commissioner of FDA in support of vaping products or the authorization process or anything that could be regarded in a positive outlook toward these products. And so it's not only what he said, it's also his actions and what he has refrained from saying is what I'm talking about.
I believe there was at least one interview that I've seen where, when asked specifically about Juul, important disclosure, my client, their marketing authorization, he did make some comment that we've done that, and physicians, this may be a useful tool, something in that vein. So it's not as though he's only focused on the enforcement side, but I completely agree with you that the messaging and action is much more, this is a law enforcement and supply side problem with a focus on trying to curtail illegal products.
Right. So we'll see. I mean, this product's been authorized, this one has not, and yet they're fundamentally identical in their functionality. It's just absolutely insanity of it can't be overstated. At any rate, let's talk a little bit about the public messaging, and that was featured, I guess, most prominently this week that jumped out to me was in the Washington Post. And there was a column in the Washington Post by Dr. Lena Wen, prominent public health personage, luminary, I guess. I've got a very dim opinion of her career and work, but at any rate, well-known public health person. And she's a columnist at the Washington Post, not a staff writer, but kind of a contributing columnist. And she did a piece on July 14th, bashing the daylights out of Zyn. And it was basically like a chat GPT regurgitation of tobacco-free kids' talking points on pouches, discouraging people, raising scare claims, and on and on. And there was an error in the piece. In the piece, she accused Zyn manufacturer Philip Morris International of having marketed the product to underage consumers via advertising and social media influencers. In reality, PMI has never done any such thing. In fact, has bent over backwards to try to curtail, that stuff. Forget, not only do they themselves not do it, they actively try to get other people who are doing that to desist from doing it, even though those other people are touting their product. And the Washington Post was forced to eat a correction. They published it as a clarification, which is kind of the self-absolving de minimis way of acknowledging that they were 100% flat wrong. But nevertheless, it was published setting of the record straight. And not 2 weeks later, 10 days later, on July 24th, Dr. Wen comes out with another piece, again bashing the daylights out of Zyn, this time with, again, the most tendentious three-card Monty misleading bunk, and again making the same errors. She insisted in this latest piece, for example, Joe, that tobacco companies, as she put it, have only recently adopted the stance that they don't market to kids, and that prior to the peak in underage use said such a thing. That too is completely false. Those companies have always and throughout that entire period and from the get-go have said that they aren't and don't market to underage demographics. So I just it's flabbergasting to me that the Post would come back and allow her more space to repeat the same kinds of errors and indulge the likes of Stanton Glantz and Mitch Zeller. I thought that, to my mind, that was just horrendously irresponsible.
Well, as usual, I'm going to look on the sunny side of this situation. I do think we're entering a period where public attention on these topics is an opportunity as much as a threat for further deterioration. I share some of, I think, pretty much all of your substantive criticisms of her presentation and framing of a lot of this information. I think, but I'll tell you what, I hope that she remains sufficiently interested to keep asking questions. And because this is not going to happen overnight, but were Dr. Wen to go on the journey of maybe she watches You Don't Know Nicotine, maybe she talks to a few other people who she trusts who have spent more time reading and studying these topics, I would welcome that. Now, you're going to say, Joe, that will happen at the 8th of never, and you will likely be right. But gosh darn, we have examples. Did you ever read Jim McManus and his posts from like 2014 or 2015?
Remind me.
He was a public health director. He's a public health director of a big county. It's like 1 million some people in England, and he walks through in clear clear narrative of how his thinking evolved on nicotine without smoke and vaping. And that's possible. It's so moving, and I got to start making notes of what are the things I'm going to put in there. It's not brief, but it's worth the time. Thoughtful, like this is a guy who took his job seriously, talked to people who knew more than he did, and explained, here's how my thinking changed over time. And that's the kind of behavior that we should all want, regardless of the subject matter, is people who have enough confidence in their own insight and judgment and perspective to acknowledge where they were wrong. And I think it's not coming to me right now, but there are others who can explain that. Your spirit animal, David Abrams, on that journey. But the fact that Jim McManus did that when he was at the cold phase of how do I devote resources and priorities for improving public health for this population, that's much more akin to Dr. Wen's experience as Baltimore City Health Commissioner, where she took very vigorous positions against nicotine vaping. So absolutely, that's such a good idea. I'm going to figure out some way to make sure somebody gets Jim McManus's post in front of Dr. Wen and say, sit down, you're a quick study, spend 16 minutes reading that, reach out to Dr. McManus, who's now like the head of all, he's like, they're like, anyway, he's a good dude. And these people, I'm not giving up on the fact that they would want to get less wrong. Everybody wants to get less wrong, as opposed to being
your
right.
Optimism never ceases to impress and amaze and inspire me. I've been reading a lot about the apostles lately, and you remind me of when Jesus sent the apostles out to talk among the Gentiles about about the new covenant, and these are the trans crucified upside down, and I mean, getting an article in front of Dr. Lena Wen and in the hope of changing her mind is on a par with like walking into the Roman Colosseum and trying to convert the lions to vegetarianism. It's not going to happen.
That's a powerful image, Jim, but I can assure you it is not that hard. It still may end in the same way, but being gobbled and failing.
Yeah, Joe, this is a lady. This is a woman who writes a column in the Washington Post called "The Checkup."
A professional. She's exactly the person who could make a big difference.
Well, let me instead of belaboring this, I mean, I shudder to imagine all the Washington Post readers who were scared out of their wits about pouches. But let me just read to you what Mitch Zeller had a pile of quote in a national outlet. I just want to read it to you because I'd like to get your opinion on it. Dr. Wen writes here, Mitch Zeller, former director of FDA Center for Tobacco Products, explained that as much as 70% of people who vape continue to smoke. He showed me data from 2 years ago that showed 84% of adult pouch users continued cigarette use. Wen writes, they might think they are engaging in healthier behavior, but dual use may not be helping them as much as they think, if at all. Now, let me just pause before I denounce that. Your view on that, please, Joe. I don't want to put words. You go ahead. Well, what's your thought on that? Because as you can tell, it really bothered me.
Sure, and the issue of dual use has been one of the important issues that then Director Zeller, now private citizen Mitch Zeller, has struggled with from forever, because it is an important issue to wrestle with. And she actually cited one of our studies. So, that's nice. But I think this is an example where people can find evidence that conforms to what they believe. And so what has failed our field is the lack of fora and capacity to try to resolve those issues in a constructive way. And what that means is people who hold a belief are able to point to credible peer-reviewed research that supports their view. And if there aren't the clashes of differing views that allow people to say, oh, I didn't really consider that, or boy, that study is a lot more methodologically sound than the one that I'm citing. Maybe I need to, shift my thinking on this. But this is not a field that is well practiced at that kind of evolution in perspective and thinking. But I'm not giving up on the field either, and believe that it can, but it's not going to happen passively or organically. It's going to have to be enough people willing to take struggle in that way. And I could tell you were giving me the kind of, that's such a word salad, Joe. You suck.
I think we're kind of talking about it at different levels, I sense, Joe. I mean, you're looking at it at a kind of metaphysical population level, you might say, and I'm looking at it in terms of what Dr. Wen and Zeller are trying to accomplish.
What we don't know, and this is, as you know, as a media professional, we don't know what are all the other things that Zeller may have said to her that she didn't choose to include in her column. She got what she needed from him to convey this point. And
great point.
That's a message of discipline.
Yes, that's exactly right. And no doubt he said a whole lot more to her about it. And and a reader or someone in this field might hope that he would want to expand on that a little bit, because that is such a narrow, cherry-picked, what I would call three-card Monty point, raising the specter of dual use to support the notion that tobacco harm reduction is actually a mirage. You would hope that a guy like Zeller, who wants to be speaking out nationally, would expand on that. And guess what? There's lots of ways for him to do it. He could do it, or he could go on social media, or he could write an article for Filter, or he could do something on his own personal platform. There's a countless number of ways that he could expand on that and say, hey, I want to add a little bit more to what I said to the Washington Post, because that was just such a narrow slice. Here's some broader thoughts on this aspect. And you know what? He's not going to do it. And here's why. Because that goal was already scored. He already got his quote. He got his little splashy ink in the paper. He got to suck up to Dr. Wen and parade his bona fides in front of the prohibition crowd and swan along his way. He couldn't give a good damn about helping the public understand that better. And the proof of that is in his silence, the same silence that he had when he was FDA director, when he was CTP director, where he never once encouraged people to switch. Sorry, forgive my blood pressure, Joe. Sorry, as you can tell, it drives me up the wall.
I just hope for our audiences, the four of them find worth investing any energy and resources to wrestle with. I've got one. I am biased. Mitch is had the and these are my words. You don't have to agree. I had the good fortune with him for almost a decade, and so I think I'm in a better position to judge. And I reject your kind of summary judgment. Does that mean I endorse and agree with every act or every statement? No. So, but it's still, let's get back to the basics. Did Dr. Wen's column, Reduce Misunderstandings about Nicotine, Smoking, FDA Regulation and its Tools, and How to Move Forward, I would say no. And I would love the chance to say, I hope she maintains interest in this topic, and I hope that she has enough epistemic humility and interest to say, are all these things that I know to be so, do they actually stand up to the kind of scrutiny that I would give to, some COVID policy or something? So,
let me put a fine point on it. And I think, given your good relationship with him, here's a
personal relationship. I'm not sure what the Venn diagram of our kind of professional views on nicotine are.
I don't mean that. I mean, unlike Dr. Wen or some of the others that we would love to see, open the aperture a little bit. Here's someone that you could send something to and say, hey, Mitch, you might want to be aware that a lot of people in this community, have concentrated in a little bit more, holistic way. And either he will or he won't. I doubt he will, but there's an opportunity.
Yeah, no, and what I think to that point, what I would say is that even if I may disagree with where he lands on any particular issue or a priority of something, Mitch is, and you're, I'm worried, when did you eat lunch? You're gonna throw up. But Central Casting couldn't find someone who's more committed to public service. So, and that then slams straight into what is the role of a government entity that is imposing restrictions on my individual ability to engage in things. So that is a big thing, and he has. I see you're like macaroni and cheese, macaroni and cheese. But I would ask you to at least leave room for the reality that this is someone who you could not find someone more committed to how to improve the health of everybody.
If you're correct about that, then we shall see in the next couple of weeks whether he has more to add to his remarks in the Washington Post or not. And I'll put a fine point on this because the great Cliff Douglas weighed in on this Washington Post piece, and I'll read his remark, and we'll move to another topic here. Philip Morris International was the one that pressed the Washington Post for correction, and that's rare. That's rare, Joe. I've worked with a lot of Fortune 500 companies in my career, and I'm here to tell you they are typically very reluctant to drop the gloves with a national news outlet like that. And to their immense credit, PMI did so, and Dr. Maura Gilchrist from PMI put up not one but two threads about this. She's the chief communications officer at PMI. She did two threads, which we'll put in the chat, holding the Post's feet to the fire. And Cliff Douglas weighed in and says, in response to Dr. Gilchrist's thread, quote, I agree. Whoever is talking, writer, journalist, public health group, tobacco company, or anyone else with a megaphone and an audience, check the facts and tell the truth. The Washington Post article relied on incomplete, poor, and selective evidence. In this case, the tobacco company, by contrast, is telling the truth. Media coverage of reduced risk nicotine products must improve, and quickly. Lives depend on it. So I thought that was really commendable. And I'm really hoping I'm seeing an increased willingness and motivation on a lot of the major stakeholders in our space to confront the news media and challenge the way these stories are framed and their act, because that makes a big difference, I think. So that would be a good pivot to Kind of a sad, or maybe nostalgic might be a better word item. The passing this week of one of the great Morton Mintz from the Washington Post, who passed away at the age of over 100. 103.
103.
Yes, more proof that fighting FDA increases longevity. And he was a stalwart, one of the great muckrakers of the late 20th century. I think he began writing. It might have even been in the 1940s, but certainly in the 1950s and 60s. And he broke many stories about malfeasance in the tobacco industry and the public health harms. And he was really one of the leading lights. I'm going to try to pull up the obituary now, but I welcome your thoughts on his legacy. And I should hasten to add too, an interesting footnote. His daughter-in-law is none other than Meredith Berkman, founder and head doyen of Parents Against Vaping.
It's a wonderful interconnected world in which we find ourselves. No, I was delighted to sit down looking at the actual printed copy of the Washington Post and read that obituary. Not that I was glad to read anyone's obituary, but glad to have the opportunity to learn more about him. And he certainly came through, and you've been able to confirm based on your firsthand knowledge, thanks to your old man's connection to him, that he was the real deal in terms of not granting really anyone much benefit of the doubt in terms of their trustworthiness, and willing to put the work in, and the discomfort of putting people in power in uncomfortable positions. So I think we as a society will be better served if more of that is pursued, and the importance of the fourth estate in terms of our collective civic responsibilities and the discharge of them.
Well, I'll back up for the benefit of our listeners. My dear dad, Coleman McCarthy, was a columnist at the Washington Post for his entire career. And Morton Mintz was one of probably his most important mentor in the newsroom there. They saw eye to eye on a lot of things. And Morton Mintz was writing on the news side, and my dad was writing on the opinion side, but they often, weighed in on the exact same issues and the same topics, and they were dear friends. And I knew Morton Mintz as a kid growing up. I, interacted with him many a time. And my dad got a nice quote high up in the obit. I'll just read the little excerpt from the Washington Post obituary, which we'll put in the thread too. It says, Morton Mintz, Washington Post reporter who brought a muckraker's zeal to business reporting. Died July 28th at his home in Washington. He was 103 years old. By all accounts, Mr. Mintz was driven by relentless skepticism toward institutions and a sense of outrage that knew few bounds. Quote, editors who cut his copy were almost as suspect as board chairmen who cut corners, close quote, said then Post columnist Coleman McCarthy upon Mr. Mintz's retirement from the newspaper.
Which isn't that, I guess that hadn't fully sunk into me though, because with my ignorance of such things, I assumed that kind of there's a chain of command and editors are the final word, but presumably there's at least in some settings there's a lot more opportunity for sounds like disagreement.
I don't know. Sausage making that goes on with that, and columns, the pieces that Mintz did were often very deep dive, what are called long form pieces, and so that's a lot for a reader to digest and consume. And so often editors are inclined to make it more concise and shorten and shape, and by doing that, you have to sometimes alter the prose or cut key salient paragraphs. And as you might imagine, the writers themselves really dislike that. And there was tension, it should be noted too. Mintz often felt, and my dad did too, that the Washington Post as an institution went too easy on corporations, especially those that were advertising in the paper, like cigarette companies. And so they really bristled at that kind of curtailment of their copy because they thought it was being done out of, gentility toward the targets of the reporting. But I want to add it. I want to read a quick passage from the end of the piece, Joe, because I think it touches on what we do so much here. It says here, as a journalism critic, Mintz aimed his barbs at news outlets he felt had too many board members from the corporate world and at editors who did not devote enough resources to making sure the FDA was doing its job. Quote, it long seemed to me that in my experience, too many reporters, too much of the time, failed to ask themselves a simple two-word question: what's important? And that, to my mind, I disagree with Morton Mintz on many, many, many things. And I have a lot of qualms and objections to his collaboration with people like Ralph Nader and CSPI and, Matt Myers. I mean, he was a part of that whole ilk of Nader revolutionaries that I think did incalculable harm to our society and economics. But at any rate, that aside, I share that view with him. Let me just say it again. Holding news outlets accountable for not focusing on FDA's failures enough and failing to ask themselves the key question, what's really important here? Now, I catch a lot of grief sometimes on this show for being too harsh on the press and for kicking too many shins. And yet, here's Morton Mintz described by the Post as having a muckraker's zeal and driven by relentless skepticism and a sense of outrage that knew few bounds. So, while patting myself on the shoulder, I'd like to think that I'm in good company in that motivation.
So, and I'm just trying to come to a summary point. Do you think, are we better as a society were there to be more reporters in Morton Mintz's in his spirit? Even if he disagrees with you on his leanings or where the harms are.
It's a great question, Joe, and I think Mintz stood out from a lot of the other reporters in that era, and even today, whose ideological passions are what drives their coverage. His reporting was so rigorous, fact-based, stood up to scrutiny. Now, I wish he had included, I think a lot of the corporate voices were given short shrift or automatically painted as the villain when those situations were a lot more nuanced. Take the airbags situation just for name one topic. There's a huge push by Nader and all those people in the early 1970s to mandate airbags being put into vehicles. And the voice of the industry was always excluded and they're only interested in profits, don't you know? And these mustache twirling CEOs, a bunch of bastards. Well, guess what? When those were put in, there were more fatalities from the airbags than from the crashes. And what's more, the traffic safety data shows that people drove less safely when they had the airbag because they mistakenly thought they were going to be protected. And so all of those downsides that were predicted and forecasted and spoken out by the corporations and all the others were given short shrift by Mintz and others at the time and ignored afterward, which has a direct parallel to what the things that we're talking about too. Okay, like the black markets, for example, forecasted, warned about, historically accurate, and yet when we say it, oh, you mustache twirling bastards, get the hell out of here. And so that's my complaint about a lot of that coverage. But his was more rigorous than others. Many others. He really stood out that way. I mean, Seymour Hersh is another example of that at the New York Times, who covered national security issues. Both of them Kool-Aid drinking lefties, but whose reporting was nevertheless, rigorous, especially compared to others where the ideology is just much more brazen.
I get to tout the Jonathan Rauch Constitution of Knowledge a defense of truth notion of you pit ambition against ambition, no appeal to authority, and everything subject to disconfirmation. And I find myself like, I love that Greg Lukianoff at Fire and his most recent TED Talk about the importance of sustaining free speech. And it really does feel like it is when voices are excluded, minimized, silenced, that everybody can end up being worse off. And it's such an appealing and seductive opportunity if you're in a position to be able to say, oh, those, we can ignore those arguments. Those are based entirely on commercial self-interest, and they're bogus, and they lie, they cheat, they stuff. And obviously that's a very prevalent theme in the field of nicotine, where so many voices are focused on making sure that their opposition cannot come to the conference, cannot submit to the journal, cannot have a legitimate place. And that's where I would say that Dr. Wen, my assumption is that TFK made a pitch to her. She loved what they had to say. She knew this was a vibrant thing, and she went with it. And then, as you said, the company that marketed that product was not prepared to just say, okay, this is the way it's going to be. So they adopted the Joe Gitchell verbs, nouns kind of leaning, and they invested effort. And, there probably were other voices too that may have reached out. And to her credit, she didn't run away from it. She then talked to additional people and did another column. Did she get to the understanding that we might wish for? No, she hasn't. But this is, I'll take a clarification. I'll take a update. I'll take is she going to get to the Jim McManus promised land of here's where I evolve my thinking? But
But notice what's more important is that people like that PMI is now in the fight, and Cliff Douglas is out there saying, yes, that's correct. I think it's glad they did so. I mean, that's to my mind, far more important even than the clarification. But I'll close this part. I want to touch on two little things before we go. I'll close this part by the quick anecdote that Morton Mintz and my dad used to lament to one another how Morton's son had gone to work on Wall Street, and my dad lamented that his son, meaning me, became a libertarian. And one time during that conversation, their mutual friend Joan Baez, the great folk singer, said, she laughed at them and said, I'm not as bad off. My son merely had to go to drug rehab. So you can imagine the consternation when the lefties have sons that don't follow suit. Two last things I want to touch on, Joe. One, a great piece in Filter Magazine featuring your colleague Ariel Celia. Which
I haven't read yet.
It's fantastic.
That's how behind it. Okay.
Yeah, would urge you to look at that. And then two other things. I want to maybe we'll pick this up next time around, and I want to talk about our special guest we're going to have next week too.
Oh, yeah.
But, there was a great piece in JAMA on state flavor bans, and inexplicably, again, there's too much to chew on now, but inexplicably they kind of buried the lead, because one of the conclusions of the study, mentioned nowhere in the promo, is that it increases people's use of cigarettes when you do that. So why in the wide world of sports are they downplaying that incredible finding?
Because the continuum of risk is a not accepted shared truth in the health and medical arena in this country. And JAMA is a great barometer of those conventional wisdom beliefs, unfortunately.
I thought up an analogy this week. Joe, let me just try this out on you, because
okay.
I really tried hard to reflect and think about your view that some people may be unaware of the Cochrane study or so wedded to their beliefs, they shut out all contrary evidence. Well, we're just a couple weeks away from the start of Notre Dame football season, my alma mater, and I am a fanatic for Notre Dame football, as are hundreds of thousands of people across this great country. And not only is it a fanaticism, like our lives are oriented around this. And what's more, it's got a religious component too. You know why? Because of the 30-foot statue of the mother of our Lord in gold on top of the building and on campus. And as the coach likes to say, Jesus might not care who wins the football game, but his mother does. And so that's the level of fanaticism. And there's a publication for Notre Dame football called Blue and Gold, and it's all the Kool-Aid, rah-rah, the quarterback's the greatest guy ever. We're going to go undefeated this year, no doubt about it. I read that magazine. But despite all that fanaticism, like, I'm aware that there's people who like USC and Michigan. I realize that there's publications that cover the football season in a different way, or more balanced way, or maybe more rah-rah Michigan way. I'm not oblivious and just shut out any discussion. I mean, that's committed to a certain outlook, but I don't think it necessarily follows that they're oblivious to the arguments on the other side, as you have suggested.
So I'm early into what seems to be a great book called Misguided by Matthew Facciani, who has a good Substack as well. And it's a lot on how our personal identities, our group identities, really do shape the way we process and hold information. And I think there are some interesting parallels to the sport idea that you relayed. But I think there are enough differences that I'm not sure that it holds up, that the mere fact that a fighting Irish fan is able to acknowledge that there are Wolverine fans and, sometimes they win, like that, it's not getting to, I mean, the basic truth there is that some team is going to win and some team is going to lose. And I don't think it fully flows, but I want to think about it a little more. You're following your alma mater's athletic program.
I keep urging them. We got to get Yale on the schedule, Joe. That would be great.
I think what I always like noting is that I believe, at least in terms of, I'm not sure if I'm going to get this right, but essentially in terms of cumulative points scored, that Yale is still the national champion, which
Here we go.
is the example of a misleading statistic if I've ever heard one.
Epistemic closure. That's a great place. That's a great place to wrap up. Your blinker fanaticism for the Bulldogs.
Look at the
really
cumulative points scored.
Just incredible. All right. Well, Joe, it's as always a pleasure. And I'm glad our new format worked out. Next week, friends, we're going to be doing the same live streaming on video format with the incredibly intelligent Joe Gitchell and I. But we're going to be including a special guest, one of the most preeminent ones we've ever had, and that is national columnist Joe Nocera, a longtime writer for the New York Times. He wrote for Bloomberg Opinion. He is now at the Free Press and has been writing about vaping and tobacco harm reduction for many, many years. In fact, he's one of the earliest voices at the national journalism level to really stick up for harm reduction and talk realistically and candidly about vaping. And he has a new piece out just a couple of days ago, which we'll preview and link in the thread. And so we're going to talk to him about the ways that journalism covers these issues and how to hold FDA's feet to the fire and how to break through some of the orthodoxies that we lament on this show so often. And so it should be a really fascinating conversation. We invite anyone to put in our audience, put questions, in our thread ahead of time that you might want us to ask Joe. And so that's going to be terrific. And that will be next Thursday, this coming Thursday at 11 o'clock. We'll do promos for it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
I'm really looking forward to it, Joe.
Very excited.
And thanks to you for organizing it. It was not my. I've spoken with Joe Nocera many times. It was your good charm that made this happen.
All good. Thank you, Jim.
So yeah, with that, it's Jim McCarthy with American Vapor Manufacturers, joined as ever by Joe Gitchell, Opinion Associates, and we will see you next Thursday for our chat with Joe Nocera. Thanks for joining us.